I have always subscribed to the idea that you should have a physical copy or a consistent means to be able to access your favorite games. You want to own those games physically. You don't want to have them tied up in an online marketplace where at any given moment your account could be compromised. And even though you legitimately bought all those games, your password got leaked somewhere, somebody else has taken ownership of your account, and you've lost access to your entire game library because of it. Or maybe it's one of those Nintendo moves like we had with the Wii, 3DS, we're going to see with more consoles here down the road, where the online store becomes inaccessible, and even though you purchased games legitimately on an account, those servers are down. Obviously, you can't just buy more new games. You can't even re-download games you bought in the past. So God forbid your Wii breaks and you need to buy a used Wii on Facebook or something, and you pick one of those up. Well, you can't sign into your Nintendo account and re-download games that you previously had on your Wii because the online services are not available. So it makes a good case for owning the physical media until you realize that, many of these discs are pushing 20 years old or more. The cartridges are even older, and how long can we expect those games to actually hold on? Regardless, 2020 saw a huge boom in people starting to collect retro video games. It was at this time that I and a lot of other people got into, buying up used games on the cheap, reselling them online. You make a little bit of profit in the middle. It was something that I made a few $100 on, didn't really go crazy about like some people who turned it into their full-time job. Because of this and because of the high demand, we saw a massive spike in the price of some of the most nostalgic games. I mean, Pokemon games were always expensive, but now, we were pushing $200 for original GBA cartridges. That was just bizarre to me, especially with games that sold millions of copies. But more importantly, we're from platforms that were really quite easy to emulate. I mean, we're talking about a Game Boy Advance game like Pokemon. You could emulate that on practically anything, but I understand that the average casual gamer didn't really understand how emulation worked. It wasn't that accessible, but I will say that in the past few years, I think it's became increasingly accessible due to the profound variety of retro gaming handhelds that are out there. Something like the Miu Mini that I feel like has, even to a degree, gone kind of mainstream. So when you have the comparison between physical and digital media, and you get hung up on, I don't want to have digital media because I don't want it tied to an online storefront and an account and all these things that could change, and then I don't really own it, there becomes a third piece in that argument, which is, how about you own a digital copy of the game, but you own it perpetually forever, so long as you have a hard drive or something that you're storing it on. I think Pokemon Crystal is a great example of this. It's obviously a Game Boy Color game, but it was also released on the 3DS Virtual Console, and that was a title in particular that a lot of people were getting really excited about needing to spend $10 on to be able to get it on the 3DS before the 3DS eShop closed, because that was ultimately the cheapest way to own a legitimate copy of Pokemon Crystal. The cartridge was insanely expensive, so being able to buy it for $10 in the 3DS eShop looked like a good deal. I know there are plenty of people online who talked about kind of panic buying to get that game. Many of the other Virtual Console games are just games in the 3DS library before the store closed, and I thought this was really quite bizarre to me that we were panic buying over the possible scarcity of a digital good. It's a digital good. So obviously there's easy ways to get Pokemon Crystal or any other 3DS game for that matter installed on your 3DS yet today, but more importantly, you could own just a regular .gbc file of Pokemon Crystal, and then that's even more universal. And that, a truly digital copy of Pokemon Crystal, that's what you can hold on to, that's what you can pass on, that's what you can have from now until the hard drive you have it on is shot, and heck, you can move it to another hard drive prior to that. That's the longevity of it, is having a true digital copy of those games, which is why I find it impossible, not even just very hard, impossible to justify the idea of buying a cartridge of, say, Pokemon Crystal for well over $100 just for it to have a little button cell battery in that's inevitably going to be dead. The cartridge itself is 20 plus years old and is probably on its last leg. I mean, it's a relic that's barely going to continue functioning for a handful more years. You can replace the battery in it, but ultimately it is just simply an old cartridge. It's not going to get any younger, and having a digital copy of that can truly last is ultimately what you want to have. So why spend upwards of $100 on a physical cartridge? Why spend a ton of money on some of these rarer PlayStation 2 games? Why even spend $20 on a PlayStation 2 game when there's a better way to experience a PlayStation 2 game through emulation, which you could even do on an Xbox Series S? You could pick up a less than $300 console that can obviously play current gen Xbox games, but can also play these retro titles like PlayStation 2 ones. They're up-resed, they have save states, just all this functionality that you're not going to get if you play it on real PlayStation 2 hardware. The purists will say it has to be on real hardware, but the argument will continue to be that that is legitimately a worse experience. And now emulation like this is nothing new, but I do think that it's becoming more and more mainstream. It's not there yet, but it's very accessible now. When you can emulate GameCube and PlayStation 2 games, not just on your computer like you could back in the day, but also on your phone, even mid-range phones, that's impressive. And to have it on something like the Xbox Series S, which is a console that's obviously very affordable compared to others in the landscape, to be able to play up to GameCube and PlayStation 2 on something like that, I think is a remarkable value. And in addition to that, you have all of those retro handhelds. In my last video a few months ago, I talked about the Mii U Mini and what a great experience it's been to own that and play some Game Boy games and things of that nature, even up to PlayStation 1, on there, because it's able to pick up and play so quickly. You can get loaded into the game so quickly, it instantly resumes your save state, you're right back where you left off, and you can close the system down, it saves your save state. I played through the entirety of Pokemon Emerald, and the only time I saw the Pokemon Emerald title screen was the first time I booted up the game. Now, if you like seeing the Pokemon Emerald title screen, you like Rayquaza on there, sure, you could boot the game up from scratch every single time, but I saved a tremendous amount of time not staring at title screens by playing the game on an emulator and got an overall much better experience because of it. So going back to the start of the video, yes, maybe it is just me, but it sure feels like the popularity of collecting physical retro games has decreased, at least to the point where we're back to where we were prior to 2020. And that makes sense to me because we've seen so much more from these retro gaming handhelds and these devices that are much more accessible to get games up and running yourself. Why spend a ton of money on just a single game that's, 20 plus years old in its physical sense, when you could play that game, possibly at a higher resolution, have a much better, much more accessible experience because you have save states and things of that nature, if you just played the game on an emulator? Why play the game on original hardware? I really, really get the fact that some people are purists, they want to play it on the original hardware, but I think for 99% of the people, they would have a much better experience if they played the game on an emulator, regardless of the fact that people may have this perception that setting up an emulator is complicated. It's not as bad as it used to be. It's continued to become more accessible, and I expect that to continue as this becomes, I think, increasingly more and more mainstream. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.